My sister's boyfriend is interested in my 13-year-old son. I am a single mother and I've had to move in with my sister for the past couple months. My ex-husband and I share custody of my 13-year-old son Roman. I love him more than I love myself. He's a beautiful boy. My sister Sarah and her boyfriend David are well off and live in a massive house. My sister was happy to take me in, but her boyfriend David. I offered to pay rent, but my sister won't have any of it, so I do chores around the house and cook as often as my work schedule will let me. I never saw much of David anyway. He was often at the bar with his friends or locked in his room playing video games. When we did see each other, he acted like I didn't exist. My son Roman was staying with his dad for a while as I was figuring things out, and I was worried about David's attitude once my son moved in with us. I talked to David and promised him that Roman would be respectful and well-behaved, but he was weird about it and shrugged me off. Then David met Roman. David is absolutely fascinated with my kid. His disposition changed so quickly that it gave me whiplash. Suddenly, he stopped locking himself in his room and has decided to spend time with us, well, mostly my son. He helps Roman with his homework. He watches all of Roman's favorite shows so that they can talk about them together. He buys him food and gifts. My sister Sarah is over the moon. She's been telling me about how us moving in has been the best thing for their relationship, because David is happier now. I thought it was sweet at first. But in the back of my head, I think something more nefarious could be going on. David texts my son often. The texts are a little strange sometimes, but I can brush it off as David suffers from autism. Before my son moved in, David was rarely ever home during the afternoon and evenings. He'd stay out after work and go drinking with his buddies until late at night, a habit he's had for years. Now, he's home all the time. He gets home before Roman gets off the school bus and stays home all day, even offering to babysit while I'm working through the evening. He still drinks, just in the house. Last Wednesday, I woke up to use the bathroom during the middle of the night. To get to the bathroom, you have to pass by my son's room. I was surprised to see that the door was closed all the way, since Roman always likes it open because his room gets hot at night. Also, he has been staying up late texting his friends lately, which has caused him to sleep through his alarm and miss the bus some days. So that night, I opened the door to let the air in and make sure he was asleep, and there was David. Standing by Roman's bed. In the dark. He stated that he was looking for his cell phone, but I saw him jump with anxiety when I opened the door. He left quickly, muttering something about how it might be in the kitchen. Why would his phone be in my son's room? And why was the door closed? David offers to drive my son everywhere he needs to go. Only him. This is the same man who wouldn't lift a finger for me until my son moved in. I caught David doing Roman's laundry, resulting in a few articles of clothing going missing. This one irritated me because I make my son do his own laundry. I asked him not to do this, but his excuse is that he is trying to save water. I don't know how to fight him on this, since it's his house. I am terrified to bring this up to my sister. My sister's boyfriend is interested in my 13-year-old son. I spoke with my son Roman, as well as my sister Sarah and her boyfriend David all individually. My first conversation was with my son. I asked my Roman if David ever touched him or anything along those lines. He adamantly denied that David ever did anything to him. My son and I have a very open and transparent relationship, so I believe him. We had a talk about boundaries. I drilled into him that David is not to drive him anywhere, text him anymore, and be around him alone under any circumstances. Then, he said something that broke my heart. He apologized for letting David treat him that way, that he shouldn't have fell for it. I assured him that none of it was his fault. Sarah was next. I knew it would turn into an argument before the conversation even began. I told her that I was uncomfortable with the way David acts around Roman, and that I think it's a lot deeper than what he portrays it to be. I mentioned that I didn't like the gift giving and the constant texting, and I brought up the bedroom and laundry incidents. Like I predicted, she was more offended that I was accusing her boyfriend of being weird towards my son. She didn't see how that was proof of anything. The more I expressed my concerns, the more defensive she got. She said that as soon as things get good for me I intentionally screw it up because deep down I don't think I deserve happiness. That she tries to help me every time, but I end up stabbing her in the back, like I am right now. So she doesn't believe me. I told her that I won't be staying at her house much longer, and that I don't want David around my kid anymore, that we'll be keeping to ourselves for the rest of my short time here. She's letting me stay surprisingly, but she said she's glad to see me go. She swore up and down that David would never hurt Roman, and that she was sad to see their relationship ruined over an accusation with no real basis. That I shouldn't let my self-destructive behavior and my bipolar paranoia get in the way of other people's happiness. And that I better not accuse her boyfriend of being a weirdo anymore. David came back from his church retreat Friday morning, which is when I confronted him. I was very upset, so I didn't go easy on him. He was thrown off by my hostility, but once he understood what I was implying, his demeanor shifted. Sit down, let's talk about it, he kept saying, except he was the one who was nervous and looked like he was on the brink of a panic attack. I kept my composure. I asked him why he was in my son's room in the middle of the night with the door shut. He gave me the same excuse, that he was looking for his cell phone. I asked him why he couldn't have gone for it in the morning. He said that he set the alarm to 5 a.m. for work, and that he didn't want it to go off with my son in the room and wake him up. I asked him why he was standing over my son's bed. He admitted that he was trying to wake him up and ask him if he'd seen his phone. Did he not just say that he didn't want the alarm to wake him up? I asked him what on earth would compel him to think it is okay to wake up my child in the middle of the night to help him look for a cell phone. He said he wasn't thinking straight, and that he was sorry. I asked him about the missing laundry as well. He adamantly denied what I was implying. He said that his and my sister's clothing get lost in the laundry all the time. That he would help me find my son's missing clothing. All while apologizing profusely. I'll admit, I was thrown off by how apologetic he was, and it made me a little soft. I thanked him for letting us stay in his house, and I apologized for not setting boundaries earlier, but I told him that from now on, I didn't feel comfortable with him being around my son. He broke down in tears and he was hysterical. The thought of me believing that he is being weird towards my son made him miserable. That he'd never do that. He said, "I love him like a father loves a son." I told him that it's unhealthy for him to be so fixated on a child, and that he cannot depend on my kid for happiness. I told him that we'd be leaving very soon. I didn't tell him where or when it was happening. A small part of me feels like I was too harsh on him overall. But he was on his knees, sobbing, like I had just pulled the rug out from underneath him. I made Roman block David's number, of course. I also purchased a nanny cam, specifically the one where you can watch the footage on your smartphone. I'll put it in my son's room when it arrives and review it every day. I'm really nervous because there's a possibility that I'll see something odious and I don't know if I can handle that. We have been staying at a motel for the weekend, now that David has returned from his church retreat. I wasn't taking any chances. $56 a night, and a little sketchy, but I don't want to complain. Again, despite the situation, his mood has been a lot better than mine has. He thinks a motel is the same as a hotel, so to him, it's like we're on a mini vacation. It's mind-blowing how kids can be so resilient, even in the most unnerving situations. But I applied for public housing a long while back and I am in the process of getting approved. They contacted me for documentation and I got verified. Date 2, my sister's boyfriend is interested in my 13-year-old son. Myself and my son Roman have been staying at a motel and have not been at the house. My sister's boyfriend David's number is blocked on Roman's phone, but he found him on Instagram on Monday night and messaged him there. The messages were, "Did you block my number? I really miss talking to you, is everything okay? Maybe in the future, we can talk to each other again. I'm sorry if I upset you or your mom. Are you and your mom safe? Where are you staying? Respond to me when you get a moment. I have something important to tell you." And many more like that, just him begging my son for a conversation. I was livid when my son showed me. I think what set me off the most is that I know David messaged him because he thought my kid would respond without telling me. He thinks they have some secret, private relationship right under my nose that I'm interfering with. We blocked the Instagram account immediately, and I screenshotted the messages. This entire ordeal upset my son. He broke down in tears when he came back from school the next day. That hurt a lot to see. I don't know if I expressed this, but Roman genuinely liked David, and they got along well. Maybe my kid saw him as a father figure, since he was shunned and neglected by my ex-husband. I think I underestimated the mental toll it would take on him from having to cut David off completely, and then block him when he reached out privately. David's harassment spilled over to me, too. He called me multiple times and texted me things like, "Let me know when you're back so we can resolve this. Am I allowed to attend Roman's baseball game on Thursday with you? I'd like to support him. Can you please answer? I'd really love to talk, just us. I'm sorry if I gave you both the wrong impression." I didn't block his number on my phone. I figured that the more he talked, the more likely he'd continue to incriminate himself and I could use his words against him. I didn't answer a single one of his questions, but I let him know that if he contacted my kid ever again or if he showed up to his school or any events that I'd go straight to the police. And that's not an empty threat, either. Unbeknownst to him, I am getting the police involved because I now have solid evidence that this man has a sick obsession with my child. The evidence came from the nanny cam. I planted the nanny camera in Roman's old room. I chose it to be motion sensitive and linked the footage to my iPhone, so I can watch it anywhere. The camera was set up on Sunday night as soon as I received the package. It overlooked the entire room. On Wednesday evening, at around 6, David came into my son's room, stood there for a moment, and then left, no longer than a minute. An hour later, he returned and started going through his drawers. He picked up a specific garment and left within less than 2 minutes. I wanted to throw up. I didn't sleep that entire night at the motel. The following day, I had someone cover my shift, which gave me the opportunity to do a deep search of David's room while he was at work and my son was at school. I found the article of clothing inside of his pillowcase, on top of the pillow, right where he would lay his head to rest at night. I saw the nut on the clothing article. That answers the question of why David was so insistent on doing my kid's laundry. I've been ruminating on the next steps to take. My sister found out that I confronted her boyfriend last week, and she is livid. Apparently, he's not the same man he was after we left, and returned to his old habits. He was back to going to bars with his friends every evening. His drinking got worse. He was no longer affectionate toward her. Apparently, it's my fault he's depressed again. If those aren't red flags, I don't know what is. I can't tell if she is in denial, or if she can't actually see them. But what she's most concerned about is that David hasn't been home since Thursday. He went to work, came home briefly, then left again without telling her when he'd be back. In my head, that makes sense. He knows that either she or I took the garment that was inside of his pillowcase, and now he's afraid to come home. It confirms all of my suspicions. I have tangible proof and video proof of her boyfriend being a weirdo. My son and I have been back in the house since Friday night. My sister still isn't kicking me out, but she doesn't want me here anymore. She's made that very clear. The only reason why I haven't packed our things and left is because David is gone. He won't tell anyone his whereabouts and has turned off his location on his phone, according to my sister. I also got approved for public housing. We'll get to move in a little over 3 weeks. There are a lot of logistics that I need to work out, but I'm glad that something is working out in my favor after this week of hell. The constant vigilance is exhausting, and I can't wait to be in a safer environment. Date 3, my sister's boyfriend is interested in my 13-year-old son. It turns out that my sister's boyfriend David was not on the run. I thought he would be considering that I discovered that he has been nutting in my son's clothes secretly at night, but I was wrong. He holed up at his parents' house, and is still currently there. My sister Sarah informed me that due to my accusations, David had a mental health crisis. She hopes I'm happy with myself, and she feels the need to stay with him for support. His entire family is infuriated with me. After I went to the police, my sister made the decision to kick me out of her home. I saw it coming a mile away, so I'm not too upset by it. I just wish she didn't feel such fierce loyalty to him and his family. David's behavior got so much worse during this mental health crisis. The harassment escalated to stalking, under the guise of wanting to clear the air. He showed up to Roman's baseball game that was held at a different school to try and speak with him. That means he found his schedule, the exact time he was playing, and the address of that school. Found the motel we'd been staying at. Created 3 other Instagram profiles to message him about how this is all a misunderstanding, how much he misses him, etc. Some of these messages were awful. Things like don't let other people make decisions for you, and you're old enough to decide who should be in your life and who shouldn't. Paragraphs and paragraphs of him pouring his heart out to my son, and begging him not to tell me that he's been reaching out. This harassment has left my son completely disillusioned. After screenshotting everything, I asked him not to read the messages anymore and to just delete them. The day David found our motel was one of the most traumatic moments of my life. I don't know how he found us. My sister knows I've been staying at a motel, but I never told her which one. On that day I needed to go to the corner store to grab something. My son was taking a shower and getting ready for bed, as he had school the next day. David had parked at the lot across the street, and I didn't see his car. He waited until I was almost at the store and my back was fully turned to go for our motel room door. It was obviously locked, so he started knocking, but by then I had already heard him and was running in his direction. I nearly blacked out from the fear and adrenaline, and it's hard to remember much. I recall that he didn't seem angry, he just had this miserable, panicked look in his eyes. He really did look like someone who was going through a mental health crisis. I told him I was calling the police and that he needed to leave. He said that he was entitled to a conversation with me, but he ran off once he saw me dialing 911. He knew I wasn't in the room. Why did he essentially try to break in, where he knew my son was alone? I of course documented this incident with the police. Before this incident, when I went to the police for the first time, the police officer I spoke with sat me down and gave me the opportunity to talk about everything. How David was very close with Roman, what I caught him doing with his clothes, the messages, etc. I presented the evidence that I had as well. I showed the video footage and gave her the article of clothing I confiscated, as well as the text messages. She then told me she would contact the district attorney, which she did soon after. I was interviewed again by a detective, and a couple days later, they called David in for an interview. By then, the stalking had begun. During my second interview, I showed him the new messages David sent, and told him about how David showed up to the school and the motel. I don't know what they asked David during his interview, but I can imagine that he denied everything and spun up a web of lies to try and make me look crazy. A detective interviewed my son as well. This is what worried me the most, and I insisted that if they didn't have to do it, I'd rather they didn't question him at all. But they said it would help build a stronger case, and I trust them. I was told I had to be there during his interview. Roman only knows about the stalking and harassment, but he has no idea about what David did with his clothes, and I want to keep it that way for as long as I can. I personally asked the detective not to bring it up. I'd just like to shield him from it all. They asked my son about the messages and the stalking, as well as their relationship. When asked about any physical contact they had, Roman brought something up that he didn't initially tell me about. In terms of the case, they are now requesting a warrant of arrest with the clerk of the court. David could end up getting up to 5 years in prison, maybe even more since a minor is involved. So that's where I'm at right now, waiting for the clerk's decision. The waiting game is stressful, but I'm trying to focus on the positives as much as I can. After the interviews, all of David's harassment stopped. I also filed a petition for a protective order after the motel incident. I've been feeling paranoid and having a lot of anxiety lately. Always looking over my shoulder, flinching when I see a stranger who looks like him, etc. I'm entitled to a conversation with you, he said when he tried to break into my motel room, but I don't believe him. I think David believes he's entitled to unrestrained access to my child due to their prior relationship. The entitlement is what scares me the most, that someone can just take something because they feel like it belongs to them. I'm scared to go anywhere with my kid. The biggest drawback is that all of this has significantly disturbed our quality of life. I know that my kid is putting on a brave face, but he's not doing well. It's getting to him, and I knew it would, but actually seeing this siphon his happiness away is gut-wrenching. He used to eat a ton, but he hasn't been finishing his food lately. Update 4. My sister's boyfriend is interested in my 13-year-old son. It has been a while and the outcome is even worse than you could have imagined. My son Roman and I are safe, and my sister's boyfriend David is indeed in prison serving a 2-decade-long sentence. After countless legal arguments and battles we were able to win. After my evidence of David being weird towards my son proved serious enough for really further investigation, David's personal belongings were seized. He was still living with his parents from what I heard and dealing with his mental health crisis. On his PC they found some, very disturbing stuff. He was found to own I believe over 5 gigabytes worth of kiddie adult films. Only then did my sister Sarah finally see him for the monster that he was. She came to my door. Roman and I moved out and now live in a house provided to us, which is very nice. When I opened the door my sister invited herself in and said she needed to talk. This was after all the conviction that had been made. She started off by apologizing profusely to me, saying how naive she was, but I really did not care. This is the same woman who would have thrown us out onto the street in favor of a man who is being a weirdo towards her nephew. Roman was not present for any of the conversation, so thankfully we were able to discuss in detail what I had found. Ultimately, I did forgive her as I believe her not to be a bad person. She was just deluded and manipulated by that piece of crap. Roman himself is doing a lot better now and it makes me so happy to see. Also, a good friend of my ex-husband's is actually in the same prison as David. I told my ex-husband of all of the events knowing that his good friend was in the same place as David, and asked him to help inform everyone of what David did. I recently heard back from my husband that the prison knows, and David is tormented inside every day, essentially being used as a soap dispenser, and in my husband's words, his back door has been stretched to accommodate a foot.